Welcome, educators. Whether you are a spreadsheet, dashboard, all things data fanatic like myself, or you break out into a cold sweat just hearing the words data meeting, it's okay. I've got you. My name is Jessica Lean, and I'm your host for this podcast, Data and Education. I'm also the founder of Data Informed Impact, where I work with schools and educators all over to get rid of some of that overwhelm and make things a little bit easier for them to make the best decisions for their students. We'll be talking about all things data culture, data literacy, and data visualization. Let's get started. Welcome to Data and Education. Today we're speaking with Kurtis Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning. Kurtis is an award-winning educator with extensive experience as a teacher, vice principal, and principal. He's a champion for collaborative structures in schools and a co-author of Collaborative Response, 3 foundational components that transform how we respond to the needs of learners. We'll be exploring his unique insights on data, particularly the importance of focusing on students, not necessarily at greatest risk, and the mistakes leaders often make with data. I also want to add that Kurtis is going to be our keynote speaker for the upcoming summit on June 10th and 11th, the Data and Education, a virtual summit. And we are so excited that everyone who buys a live and replay ticket gets a copy of his book, the book that I just referenced. So we're getting hyped for all of that. Super excited.
Yay.
I know, right? There are other things that we'll talk about throughout this podcast in reference to the summit that we've been working on in the background. But I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome, Kurtis.
It's so great to be here, Jess. Really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. I feel like we've been talking a lot the past few days because
Yeah, I was going to say, for anyone who follows your podcast at all, we've been recording 7 speakers in 7 days. And together with your podcast and our Building a Culture of Collaboration podcast, yeah, they've been great conversations, and you've got some amazing speakers coming to the Data and Education event. That's going to be awesome.
Oh, I'm even more excited now that we've had a chance to sit down and talk with several of them. And shout out to Lorna, Kurtis's wife, who is the co-founder and co-author of the book and was also there for the podcast. We had such a good time. So it's been a pleasure. Anyways, back to your background. Tell us a little bit more.
Okay, so I have a rather unique journey through education. I began my teaching career in a community in Northern Alberta. It began in grade 3. It was a location that I planned to go for 6 months for a maternity leave. It ended up being 9 years. But here's the super interesting thing, Jessica. So I went up for a half year, and then my next full year that I was there, at the end of the year, I got offered an assistant principal position at the school. It was a unique situation where they were trying to build up a cohort of leaders within the division, and my school happened to have an experienced principal there. And so they felt we could add in a assistant principal designation for somebody to learn. Now, that may seem a little bit strange with someone with 1.5 years of experience, but it was about a 0.1 assistant principal role in the school. So I was pretty much full-time teaching, but over the next 3 years, it led to some really unique experiences where I would have an opportunity to lead meetings. I would have an opportunity to engage in some teacher supervision and evaluation. I began mentoring other teachers as part of this role. So I was still learning the craft of teaching, but I was starting to develop some leadership skills and engaging, thinking about what does it look like for education across the entire school and not just in my classroom, which is typically a teacher in their younger career. You know what's happening inside your 4 walls, but not as much of a care what was happening outside. And
That's so interesting. I was just gonna say, because I don't know if I've heard you tell that story before. And it's so funny because I first started taking on leadership roles in 1.5 years into my teaching as well. Because I just happened to join a school in their 2nd year of being open, and they had switched to a team-led school. And so I became part of that team. I became an instructional coach, all very quickly. And it's so it's so interesting to hear that someone else has had that experience because I do feel strange telling it. I'm like, yeah, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden, like a year into it, it just clicked, and then I began teaching and also teaching others at the same
Yeah.
time. It's wild.
Well, and the interesting thing with this is the school division as part of this building up a cohort
Yeah.
of leaders from within. They also supported my master's work as well. So at that same time, I was engaging in my master's and really thinking about how do we create teams. This was at a time when the PLC movement was just starting to take root within North America. So I was learning the theory at the same time, which was hugely impactful. I look back at it now almost 30 years later and realize it had a tremendous impact, especially when it came to leading from such a young age and without I didn't have the classroom background to say, well, in my 20 years of experience, I would suggest this. It made me realize that the expertise wasn't being held in a position, i.e. mine, it was in the room, and how do we
Yep.
leverage it? So it had me thinking really, really early in my educational journey and especially leadership journey about how do we create teams? How do we create effective structures so that no one was trying to do this work on their own? And a little bit of it was I don't have the background or expertise to be able to be an authority in my leadership. So I have to figure out a way to lead that captures the expertise that's in the room, which was far beyond my own personal
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah. I also can can feel that from my story because I like I said, we switched to being a team-led school, so it wasn't about, being the expert in the room, it was about
Yeah.
being able to ask the right questions and have the right kinds of conversations and collaboration, and even through my instructional coaching, I was trained not to be the expert in the room, it was
Yeah.
you ask questions of them, and then together you guys collaborate and brainstorm ways to solve those problems. So it was less about being that expert and more about just being someone who can facilitate those kinds of conversations.
And you
So
nailed it right
yeah,
there. The idea of how do you facilitate the conversations? And again, through the master's work that I was engaging in, realizing that just putting people in a room and saying, hey, let's collaborate doesn't really yield the results that
right.
we want to see. We have to think about structures and processes. So it had me thinking through that at a really, really early stage in my formative experience and has stuck with me. And yeah, nearly 30 years later has really influenced and impact how I view or aspire to see education in our schools.
Yeah, makes so much sense. I didn't realize there was so much parallel in my story as well. Um, it's funny that we found something new to talk about after
Yeah.
talking so much the past few days. I want to hear a little bit. So we talked a lot about like your beginning of being in the education world. I want to hear a little bit about the start of your business and what kind of led you to start working with other schools on collaborative response.
Yeah. So fast forward, about 6 years after that, and I had already assumed a principalship in a small school and um, was thinking through a lot of these collaborative structures, but then moved into a new school now in Southern Alberta, where I came in as the youngest educator in the building, and now I'm leading. And this was a building that had, or a campus with amazing teachers doing great things for kids, but lots of isolated practice. Sometimes the struggle I was having in my classroom, the solution was three doors down, and we didn't have mechanisms to be able to leverage that effectively. There were, the funny thing is the school had done work around PLCs, but they weren't really PLCs that were happening. There was teams that would come together with common time in the school day. It was embedded, but it was really it varied greatly between teams. In some teams, it was all right. Let's get together and decide what we should put on the bulletin board outside for the next month, and we'll plan the parent um, engagement night together. Who's bringing
Right.
muffins to that?
Yeah.
So, um,
Logistics. Yeah.
yeah. So, and through this, we were having a number of students that were slipping through the cracks, not because of anyone's disregard or lack of attention to students. I mean, everyone was there for kids, but we lacked systems. And so we began to put some really interesting systems into place. Other schools became started to hear about what was happening in the school. We started to have visitors come. I started to get requests to, can you share how you've set up and structured things within the school? Um, and when we would start to describe this to other schools, we needed language to put to it, saying we kind of operate with PLCs, but with some variations, and we've got a bit of a response to intervention, but it's a little bit different. That was obviously a very confusing explanation. And so
I
we
get it.
started, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So we began to refer to this work as collaborative response and started to think about what are the key things that we are doing that are leading to success that could be replicated in another school. And then it just took on a life of its own. Um, we ended up, and my wife was in that school for the first year, and then she moved into a divisional role, but then was obviously aware of what was going on within the school. And as we started to explain it to others in 2015, it led to a self-published book, and the work just kept growing. All of a sudden, large high schools were trying to put the framework in place in their schools. We were seeing K to 12s, elementaries, all the way across. And fast forward to, oh boy, almost 20 years later, and about 85% of our province of Alberta here in Canada have either adopted it system wide, like their entire jurisdiction, or have schools that have begun implementing. And we've also worked then with schools across Canada, United States, Iceland, Australia. Just the collaborative response, which is what we came to refer to it as, is really thinking with a high degree of intentionality and alignment for how do we support students? How do we respond to all of the needs that we're seeing in a holistic manner? But we're doing it in a way that's leveraging and building the immense expertise amongst the staff team. We often joke that in our building, we had centuries of teaching experience with you added it all up. And how could we leverage that in a really purposeful way? And the thing that we found out over time is we're not just supporting kids, we're actually supporting the adults, and everybody is growing. It wasn't until years later when the Hattie research came out and started to talk about this thing called collective efficacy, where we
Right.
went, oh my goodness, those are the words for what we were experiencing. It was, all right, any issue that comes up in the school, okay, what do we do? What can we do? And we had mechanisms to have that as a really purposeful, focused, and actions-based conversation over and over and over again.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I can't imagine that feeling when you've been working on it for so long and then to hear that this person has done this huge meta-analysis and
Hmm.
has decided that that's one of the main contributors of student success is the collective efficacy of the staff and
Yeah,
just to have that reassurance that everything you're doing is along the right path is just I can't imagine how that must feel. That's
it's
awesome.
yeah, and it's really humbling and fascinating all at the same time that we're sharing this work now with thousands of schools, but it was never with the intent of creating something to share out. It was just, this is how we're organizing ourselves to support kiddos. And when we now hear of the extensive work happening around multi-tiered systems of support, we go, oh my goodness, we can help support that because we've actually got a further enhancement that whenever schools that are engaging in MTSS work see the collaborative response work, almost instantly their eyes light up because they can see all the connections. But then we've got a couple of seemingly minor alterations that have an incredible impact
Yeah.
for staff and for kids.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, in order to have all of that work, you have to have it in order to have it working at the highest level, you've got to have that collaboration. And I could see how that would fit right in with MTSS and
Yeah,
really impactful
my,
addition.
anytime that I hear somebody say, uh, I'm the MTS coordinator in the school, and I'm the person who is setting up our structures for supporting students. I always wince just a little bit. Not that the person isn't doing amazing work, but I see it as building overall school culture. How can that be just a single
Right.
responsibility, one person? To me, it involves the team, and if you don't have your principal and administration as part of that, are you really building a responsive culture across the school? And it needs to be more than just identifying kids who need higher tiers of support. It's a much bigger way of thinking when we're thinking about how do we collaboratively respond within our building. It, we often say the work's not a model, it's a mindset. It's a way of thinking in our build
Absolutely.
to respond to students.
Absolutely. And, I always bring up my story of working with the, North College Hill Elementary School and how we brought them out of improvement status, and
Yeah.
you're right, 100%. We did not even start rolling out any kind of systems until we had been to I say we, I wasn't even there the first year, but they're still my family. Until they had gone to conferences, and then we had started presenting to the whole staff about, this is what the mindset is, and these are the discussions that we're gonna have, and we did years. I mean, 2 to 3 years of that before we even started to roll out the systems, and, and it wasn't just one person. We had an MTSS team, but that team was
Beautiful.
also intertwined, connected to all the different PLCs, all the other committees that we had in the school, the district level. We had administrators, we had social workers. So we really were bringing everyone together, getting a full picture of everyone's perspective, and coming up with a system that truly worked in that school. And it's hard to take that
Love
and
it.
just drop it into another school because you do end up with that one person who's in charge, or that one small team that's in charge, and it takes that pre-learning and that collaboration on the front end to make sure that everyone's kind of having the right kinds of discussions and changing that mindset to begin with.
It's interesting when you talk about dropping it into another school, because
Mhm.
that's been one of the things we've had to really think critically about is what are the foundational components, and it's referenced in the title of our book, that are universal, that it doesn't matter if you have a school of 50 students or 5,000. What are
Right.
the universal components that we would see if you're really engaging in this? The exciting thing is no school's collaborative response framework looks identical,
Right.
because everyone has different contexts, different staff to work with, but there's some underlying foundational components that are key, to be able to have in place. And we've broken it down into three foundational components. And in the book, we talk about these three, and there's a visual that shows them as three puzzle pieces connecting to one another. And they are the collaborative structures and processes. How have you created purposeful and intentional teams within your school? The second component is data and evidence. How do we utilize data and evidence to inform those conversations? And then our third is continuums of support. Have we clearly articulated what we would see at each tier of support within our school to support students? And the interesting thing is taking those pieces apart and examining them, and thinking about what does that look like in our school is an important first step. It usually takes about a year to really think critically through that. But then the real work comes when you put those pieces together. When you start having conversations where data and evidence is informing those conversations, and we're turning to our continuum and saying, have we tried this and this? And then we're looking and saying, oh, we need to go back and look at our tier one universal practices and refine that. It's exciting because the work is never finished in a school. You're always looking for that next enhancement. And I'm sure that's been your experience too of you never reach a
Yep.
place of, oh, we're done. Let's move on to our next thing. We often say when schools begin working in collaborative response, it is one more thing on your plate. Of course, there's some front end work that happens, but in time it becomes your plate. It's just how this is how we function. to respond to kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree that there are some, universal pillars that you can bring into every school. And it's funny to hear you talk about your three and then to think about how your data and evidence then can be broken into my three, which is the data culture, data
Yeah.
literacy, and data visualization. So it's just so, and in culture, I talk straight back to the collaboration piece. So to hear about how all of it's so connected is interesting. And then which leads me into my next question. I want to hear a little bit more about how you've used data in your work for collaborative response, or I'm sorry, data in your work for collaborative response.
We've had a great conversation the last week or so on, is it data? Is it data? Um, I've started using them interchangeably now. Um, the fascinating thing when we talk about these three foundational components, and where I see you light up too, Jessica, is virtually any school that we begin working with now can see different things they're already doing in their building that connect. And we always, when we first start working with a school or with a district, we say, don't throw away things to start this work. Think about what you already have and what connects, because there's almost always, no, not almost, there always is an aha of here's the next piece of how things can align and connect. Lots of times schools have many of the pieces already in place, but they haven't thought about how they connect with a high degree of intentionality. So coming back, before we jump to the data, can I take just a moment to kind of describe our collaborative structures and processes? Because
Yeah,
it'll help with the next part, because
absolutely.
there's a couple of things that go in direct contradiction to how most schools operate, even schools that have strong MTS structures and frameworks. So we talk about in every school needing 4 layers of team. And these 4 layers, each one has a purpose and a focus. And the great news is when I describe this, and when you think of your last school, I'm willing to bet you're going to be able to say we have 3 of those already in place. Okay. So 4 layers. First layer, we were, and think of these as categories, because
Okay.
you might have multiple things happening in a particular category. So our first category is collaborative planning. Do we have opportunities for teachers to come together and look at what are we doing to support all students? Usually in those conversations, in time, we want to be looking at data. We want to be able to say, where are some of the strengths we're seeing for our kiddos? Where are some of our gaps? Create some plans to address those gaps, focus, look at one another's instruction. But the intention here is you're probably in this conversation not talking about individual students, but looking at the whole. Now, the beauty of this is any school that hears this right now goes, we have PLCs. Yep, that's accomplishing what that first layer. And again, when we hear a school say, but we've got PLCs in place, do we dump them? We say, no, you've got the first layer covered. That's
Right.
beautiful. Okay. I'm going to skip the second and come back to it. And I'm going to go to the third layer. Third layer, we call the school support team layer. And essentially, do we have a consistent team, or in some cases, teams that are coming together to look at students who need support beyond the classroom? So in my school of about 300 students, this was myself as the principal, the assistant principal. We had a learning support teacher, which could be in another school context, the special education coordinator. Let's say we also had a family school liaison that worked with us in the high school in our community. Every Thursday morning, the 4 of us met, and in time, we had a consistent and predictable agenda. We had a referral process for how kids got on that agenda. But essentially, we were every week looking at who are the students at risk, who are the ones that are needing additional support. Sometimes the same student would be on our agenda for multiple weeks as we were really thinking about how are we supporting them or their family. Sometimes the conversation was about, do we need to look at further supports for a student? Sometimes it was about, do we need to look at further support for the teachers?
Right.
Is there a gap in some professional learning, or is there a teacher that we need to do a little bit of coaching and support? Or even better, do we have another teacher that we could mentor or pair
Yep.
up to be able to help support this? Okay. So I've worked with a large high school where they didn't have one school support team. They had several. They had a grade 10 team, a grade 11 team, and a grade 12 team. Each one was responsible for just keeping track of the students that were getting identified for needing additional supports. Any school that I work with in the US typically says, yep, that
Right.
layer exists when we start bringing in our special education
Yeah.
personnel or specializations. Okay, fourth layer. This is the easiest layer to understand. It's the most intensive. We call it the case consult layer, even though in our school we didn't have any meeting that we called a case consult. But we had several meetings where we bring one student on the agenda and we get the right people around the table. Okay. So anytime you're meeting with one kid on the agenda, it falls into this layer. And the intention is that, and we use these layers in one high school, and they went, oh my goodness, so much of what we're doing in this school falls into that fourth layer. And they had really good structures, but most of them were looking at one kid and they went, no wonder we're feeling exhausted, overwhelmed. It feels like we're
Right.
whack-a-mole because a school of 1,200 kids, they were going one student at a time conversations and couldn't keep up. The idea of this layering is that in time, we should see less and less students hitting this third and fourth layer. And the ones that do are the ones who absolutely need to be there. So through this conversation or through thinking about how we were setting this up within our school, there was something missing. Sometimes our PLCs were not necessarily responding to some of the more unique needs that were coming up in the classroom. And sometimes at our school support team layer, it felt a little bit like a handoff in regards to a teacher saying, I've done everything, and it gets referred up to us. And
Right.
sometimes in that conversation, we would go, you know, the person who has the answer to this particular issue is 2 doors away. How do we make that connection? And we introduced this layer of team that we called the collaborative team meeting. And it was different, Jess. We I'll describe it to you here. It's a very purposeful meeting protocol. And for us, it makes all the difference. But it's not in replacement of any of those other layers. Those other layers are
Okay.
important. But the second layer is what we call the collaborative team meeting. Here's what it looks like. In my school, if I'm in a PLC with grade alike partners, or in high schools, we usually see these in subject area teams. I've worked with smaller schools
Right.
where there's the K-4 team and the 5-8,
Right.
grade 8 team, whatever that looks like. What we do in the collaborative team meeting is we mix the people up and we have a very specific and tight protocol. It looks like this. We always start, and people have to come ready, which is where the data is going to come. I'm promise I'm getting back to your question.
I know you are. I believe it.
Um, Everyone has to come ready with what we call a pre-meeting organizer. And it's not meant to be intensive. In fact, we usually say if you're taking more than 5 minutes on this, it's probably too much information, but it's to be ready in the conversation. So I'm facilitating and I say, Jess, who's the student you've brought to celebrate? And remember, our overarching topic for today is literacy. And in time, we start aligning these topics with priorities in our school
Yeah.
improvement plan. Okay. So you say, oh, yeah, I've got a celebration. I have Damien, and Damien has started to put some of the comprehension strategies that we've been teaching in class now into practice. And instead of us going, yay, and writing it in the notes, we say, yay, what do you think you did that led to that success? And what we're trying to do is, even though that celebrations is only a 5 to 10 minute portion, we're trying to really have people think about what are you doing in your practice
Yeah.
that is
Right.
leading to those successes. When someone says, oh, it's a miracle, the kid just finally got it, then we go, okay, why do you think they got it? What do you think you've done? And when you say, well, I've got bookmark of strategies that kids can use, and what I have them do is check off each time they answer a question which strategy they're using. Now that's fantastic to be able to identify this is something I've done, but now someone in the room is going, that's genius. Can I have a copy of that bookmark?
Right.
I'd love to see what that looks like. So we're trying to build really high degrees of efficacy through that small portion. And then we move to the next part of the meeting. And this is the game changer. I know people listening are going to get really excited about this, because when I say, Jess, who's the student you've brought today? And 20 seconds or less, what's the key issue? Now, all of us have been in meetings where you say, yeah, I've got Stephanie, and let me tell you everything going on with Stephanie. Let me tell
Tell
you
you this
everything
whole
I've
story.
tried. Yeah, the whole story.
You won't
Someone in the
believe what happened yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone in the room goes, "Hey, Jess, one of the things you could try is this." And you go, "Oh, no, that wouldn't work. I've tried that." Or, "No,
I
let me
tried
tell you
everything.
more." Yeah, let me tell you more about Stephanie so you can understand it better. No, what we do in this is we say, what's a key issue? What's one thing that you're seeing getting in the way? And when someone says, "Oh, Stephanie has so many things getting in the way, I can't narrow it to one," we go, "Okay, that's a conversation for one of our other layers. Let's refer Steph to our school support team layer, or maybe should we set up a meeting for just Stephanie? Um, if it's that complex." But
Right.
we come back to the key issue, and let's say that you say, "My key issue is lack of inferencing. The kid's a great reader, but they're unable to detect clues when reading to infer what's happening." And we go, "Okay, great. So, lack of inferencing, lack of application of inferencing strategies. Have I got it?" And you go, "Yeah, I think that's the key issue." Then we go, "Awesome. Everyone else, who else has a student where you've seen that? Just the name, no story." And what we're trying to do is not to make this about Stephanie or about just the teacher. We're trying to make it about, this is a key issue that many of us share. And then we go, "All right, let's start. What could we do?" And we just start throwing out ideas. And I say, "In my classroom, I've done this." And someone else says, "Interesting. I've also done something similar." And you jump in and said, "I've got an app I've been using with the kids to ask them questions." And someone else says, "Ooh, I've done something like that, but I actually write up some questions on the boards for kids to think about when they're reading." We brainstorm all of this, and in time, it's not a brainstorm solely. We start referencing our continuum of supports. We start looking at our continuum and saying, are there ideas here? Or when someone in the room goes, one of the things I've done in my room, if everyone goes, "Oh my goodness, that's gold," we write it onto our continuum so we don't
Yes.
forget. So this
Yes.
starts to become the connection. And then we come back and say, "All right, Steph, for Stephanie, what's one thing that you want to try? What's one action?" And you identify. And then we go over and say, "All right, Marcus, who's the student that you had with this same key issue, and what's one thing you want to try?" And when he goes, "Well, I have Philip, and it's kind of like this, but not really. Here's my," and we go, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. We're not diving into the conversation about Philip. We're just, what's one thing you want to
Right.
try for this key issue?" And so it becomes hugely solutions based and action focused. Everyone walks away with one thing that they're going to try, but we often say this this one meeting at this second layer is where we start to see impact happening. Where I'm in a conversation, you mention a website, and I go, "That's genius." After the meeting, I track you down in the hallway and say, "Hey, can you show me where that website is again? I would love to see that." We start creating just really robust layers of collaboration within our school. Or we identify that this is a key issue that nobody really has some great strategies. All right, we need some professional learning around this. Or we take it back to our collaborative planning, i.e., PLCs, and we say, "Okay, here's an area we need to start looking at and focusing on." It's a game changer, these four
Yeah,
layers of
I can
team.
imagine.
And now let me get to your question. So,
First, I have a couple of follow-up
yeah,
questions,
please.
and in regards to your, the second layer. First, before I get first off, and then first off before that, I want to point out for those of you that aren't watching, as you start talking through the layers, I get to anticipate that one, the second layer more and more, so much so that I realized that I was getting very close to my computers. And
Oh, when people see it in
it's like, "Oh,
action, they go, yeah, when people see it in action, they go, "Oh my goodness, this is absolute game changer." And it is. It
yeah, I
totally
can
changes how
imagine."
you start talking about kids and
So
things
I
happening.
have so I have 2 questions, that kinda go together. Uh, my, first question is it just one team that's meeting or multiple teams during a specific time? And it or do the people in the meetings, change out? Is there just, one specific group, or do you switch out teachers? And I think you kind of mentioned this in the beginning, but I just want you to refresh my memory.
Yeah. And I will share with you a link to some further resources to dig a little deeper. We've got
Absolutely.
a blog posting, a video that talks about these layers of team. Essentially, this collaborative team meeting we want happening every 3 to 5 weeks.
Uh-huh.
And depending on the size, we often say to schools, if you already have teams meeting, awesome. And we have schools that say, well, we have PLCs that meet on a weekly basis. We say, awesome. Every fourth week,
Right.
add this meeting process to it. Now, in time, I want to get that you're meeting for collaborative planning, i.e., PLCs, with people that you share a common teaching experience with. In your CTMs, I want to create diversity. I want different people at the table. In the collaborative planning, it's probably just teachers in that conversation. In the collaborative team meeting, we want to have administrators join. I want to have if I have a special education coordinator in the school, I want that person in the conversation. I want to try and get a diverse amount of people to just really access all the different things we could be trying. And I want to have set up in the school that everyone's involved in a collaborative team meeting, but it really depends on your school size. So I'll go back to that school that I mentioned had multiple school support teams because they were a high school of 2,000 people. They had department teams that were meeting as their collaborative planning, but then they had 16 cross-departmental teams that met through a schedule that they had set up, and it would set up that on a particular day, there might be 3 teams meeting. And this is where it becomes really diverse based on the school, based on their timetable, their scheduling. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it really becomes dependent. And this is one of the things about the collaborative response work is it looks different in every school, but we always say, I don't care if your school has 50 kids or 5,000, you need 4 layers of team. And one of those layers has to be this collaborative team meeting conversation. The
So cool.
interesting thing, and we'll get to the data and evidence, is I know lots of schools are going to say, we have 3 of these teams. We're well on our way. But then it also transforms the continuum of supports. Almost every school I've ever worked with in relation to response to intervention or MTSS talk about 3 tiers. We actually break it down into 4 tiers, and it's not about adding one more tier on top. We take the universal and split it apart really intentionally, where tier 1 becomes what are the things we agree everyone will do for every child in every classroom? What are the non-negotiables?
Right.
And in time, we don't have 50 things at tier 1. We have 5 to 10. Non-negotiables we will see in every classroom. Then for us, tier 2, so think of it as universal A and universal B. Universal B becomes what are all the differentiated strategies, interventions, and accommodations we could try, but
Yep.
still in the classroom. And so we often, when we show the visual, it's not a triangle or a pyramid. A pyramid makes sense if you're tiering kids. We
Right.
say stop tiering kids, tier your supports, and it becomes more of a cone, or we've had some people say, oh, you're tiering, it's a tier drop. Because at tier 1, we
Oh,
start
there we go. Yeah.
narrowing, but tier 2 bulges. There's lots of things at tier 2 we
Yep.
could try
Right.
before we ever look at tier 3. And we define tier 3 as supports provided by someone other than the classroom teacher.
Yep.
And tier 4 is supports provided by someone external to the school. And so these 4 tiers start to align to the 4 layers of team so that we see the collaborative team meeting, which is that second layer, is really intended to be a purposeful space where we're exploring tier 2 practices, i.e., differentiated strategies that you could try in the classroom. We often say the collaborative team meeting looks like you're talking about kids, but you're not. You're really just using the kids to leverage a
Yep.
conversation about practice so that, yeah, we're supporting students, but through every one of these conversations, everybody's toolbox is growing.
Yeah.
We often say a successful collaborative team meeting means everyone's left with a couple things in their toolbox. And I've been doing hundreds of these collaborative team meetings, facilitating, modeling. Even last week, I was in one where I just heard a strategy I've never heard before, or a resource I've never heard before. Like,
Yeah.
it's fascinating how when you get people together that have diverse backgrounds and expertise, the ideas and strategies that come forth, it's fascinating.
Yeah. I can imagine. I mean, it makes me like want to cry hearing about it. I've never even witnessed one. Oh, but I super cool. Okay, so let's go back to the data then.
There.
Let's
Okay.
let's bring it full circle.
So
That was fascinating, though. I did not want to interrupt any bit of that because it's all very incredibly important stuff, and I love. I had to say that I love so much that you've kind of molded the idea of like the tiered students into more of like the tiered supports
yeah.
and shown how it's connecting to your different meetings. I think that that's just like it makes so much sense in my brain that wants
Yeah.
everything to like be aligned and a pretty graphic
And
organizer.
and this is it's a huge mindset shift. It sounds like it's just a small shift in language, but it's massive when it
Yep.
comes to how we respond, where we say, no, Juan's not a tier three kid. Juan's a
Right.
kid who right now needs tier three support. Again, it sounds like a small shift in language, but it's massive for how
Yes.
we think about how we support kids. So data and evidence, and Jess, I promise you're going to get goosebumps with this.
That's
We take the data and evidence and start to align it to our layers of team. And one of the keys, and this is your data visualization, why I get so excited when I see what you're helping people do with the visualization. We say to schools, if you do nothing else, start color coding your data and
yep.
use a simple criteria of red, yellow, green, blue. Red
Yep.
being kids not meeting expectations, yellow is approaching, green is meeting, blue is exceeding. Okay.
Yep.
The color coding becomes important because when we come into our collaborative planning, that first layer, we want to look at the overall data. We want to see where there's gaps and trends. And we listen to a number of people who will be presenting at the data summit that have created dashboards to help us see, here's some standards and which students are struggling through which, like that becomes really powerful. In the collaborative team meeting, we say, stop focusing on your red kids. Okay. So the idea here is with your layers of team, we're not ignoring those kids, but
Yep.
we're assuming that there's already conversations happening about
Yep.
them in our more intensive layers. What we say is focus on the yellow. So in the collaborative team, picture this. Let's say this is the bar we want to get every kid to. And
Right.
if I were to ask you, Jess, who's a student you've brought today? And what's a key issue? Your head's almost immediately going to go to your most complex student, your most at risk, the one that's taking up 95% of your time in the
Right.
classroom. But when we start to color code data, it may be, oh no, that student based on the data is being coded as red. And sorry, I don't mean to say coded. We're not labeling kids, but we're using the data to
Right.
surface conversation. So the bars here, we almost always instantly go to those furthest away from the bar. And let's be honest, they may be students who require a more complex plan that require much more than what you can do possibly in the classroom. I mean, that's a big part, but it's going to take more
Yeah.
thought. And again,
Yeah.
this is we have layers of team. Instead, focus on the yellow. And this is where teachers get super excited because I'm bringing students to the conversation that usually aren't coming up anymore.
Right.
So I'm bringing Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is a great reader. And sorry, I keep going back to literacy. Let's go to a high school example. I've got Elizabeth who's sitting with a 55% in my class. She's doing okay, but a key issue is that she doesn't check assignment criteria before handing in assignments. If she did that one thing, we'd see so much more success. So then we say, all right, again, there's our key issue, handing in assignment criteria. Anyone else? Who else has a student? And we go through that key issue process. But the data and evidence starts to be used to focus on students who are on the cusp,
Yeah.
who are close, and all it may take is an adjustment in the classroom. The use of, I'm going to steal your graphic organizer that you're utilizing
Right.
with your kids, and I'm going to try it. And the other thing that happens is because they're kids who are close, the likelihood of a strategy that I'm trying in my classroom having success is much, much higher, which then creates further resiliency and appreciation for our collaborative team meetings. We often say
Definitely.
we're going to use the data to provide support for our most at-risk kids by not focusing on our most at-risk kids. because when I go into my classroom and I'm using a visual schedule, because I think it's going to help Elizabeth, that schedule helps everybody.
Right.
It's really applying UDL practices in a really intentional way. And
Yeah. God.
and we often say then that again, that alignment starts to happen so that in each one of these layers of team, every layer isn't about talking about Kurtis. No, Kurtis has got a conversation happening over here. Let's instead start focusing on different a different subset of students who are so close it might just take subtle adjustments. But again, everyone's capacity is growing. Everyone's toolbox is growing through this, and that helps all kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can totally see how that would also be such a huge motivator because I do think so often we're focusing all of our meetings on talking about those students that need those more intensive conversations and a more diverse group of people in the room uh, in order to solve some of those barrier or like get over some of those barriers and hurdles that that student has. Um, and it's we're not going to do a whole lot by talking about those in these other readings. Really, what
Right.
we're doing is we're just ignoring all of the other students who may not need as much support, but they still do need that support. So being
And the key
able to,
there
yeah,
is if we're not proactive, those students might become our at-risk students
absolutely,
2, 3, 4 years from now.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. It's a much more proactive versus reactive uh, strategy,
Yeah,
and
100%.
it makes so much sense. I'm all for it. I love it. And I know that I had some questions to ask you. Actually
I
covered
kind of
all of
took
it.
us off script, Jess.
No, I did way before you did, so it's totally fine. I do want to come back and talk just a little bit about a couple things. I want to hear a little bit more about what you're presenting on at the summit, both your keynote and your breakout session, and then we'll
Yeah.
talk about the podcast series as well.
So the keynote is really going to talk about how do we create these layers of team, because I'm a big believer that you can gather all the data you want. You can organize that data into beautiful dashboards that are timely, responsive. But if you don't have intentional structures to pose
Yep,
the question, so what are we going to do? The data's meaning. The data is meaningless. I feel. So
I agree.
I'm going to really focus in on how do we create these 4 layers of team, and so that we have a purposeful mechanism to examine the data and evidence that we have. And we're really going to talk about how that simple color coding can transform how you're responding to the needs of all students in your school in a highly intentional, highly aligned way. And then, so that'll be the keynote, is kind of this big picture. And I'll break it down much more succinctly than I have in this conversation. And then the breakout is going to focus in on 5 things leaders can do to purposefully organize data for conversations. It's posed around 5 mistakes that we see leaders make. And the interesting thing is, I always lead it off by saying these are easy for me to identify because I've made all of these mistakes and
Yep.
I see them replicated over and over. And one of the mistakes is going to be organizing the data for a conversation. And part of that organization includes color coding. If,
Yes.
if people walk away from this podcast with nothing else, please start color coding your data. And then it will start transforming conversations in your school.
Yes, I agree, and I actually touched on that on my keynote as well as and even not only for the sake of just being able to kind of determine who to work on and what meetings, but also for the sake of the cognitive load that it kind
Yeah.
of brings down when you have things and colors that people identify with and can understand very easily. So
Yeah.
100% with you there. And then I want to talk just a little bit. We briefly mentioned at the beginning of the episode that we are doing the 7 speakers in 7 days, and that we've been interviewing 7 of our summit speakers the past few days. So I want you to talk a little bit about where people can hear that, when they can hear it, etc.?
Yeah. So our podcast is Building a Culture of Collaboration. And beginning June 2nd, we're going to release one of those episodes every day in lead up to the Data and Education Summit happening June 10th and 11th. So from June 2nd to 8th, people are going to be able to learn from 7 people that'll be presenting at that summit. And I'm super excited for people to hear this. And I know they're going to be released at the same time through your podcast
Yep.
as well. And I think people are going to get really excited with the expertise that you've brought together for that
Yeah.
summit. They were great
Yes.
conversations and can't wait to release them.
I agree, and the cool thing too is that Curtis and I decided to release different ones on different days, so if you get super excited that first day, you have 2 to listen to, and same thing for some of the other days, you can bounce around, so, the conversations were awesome, so much fun, and it got me even more excited for the summit. As a reminder, and, we'll put the summit link in the show notes, but you can also just search Data and Education, a virtual summit. You'll find it there. And we'll be able to, get that rolling and June 10th and June 11th. And I'm can't wait. So and that's in this by just telling people how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah. So the best way is if someone was to search out jigsawlearning.ca. That's our website. All of my contact information is there. Some resources to learn more about the collaborative response work and how you can begin taking a look at how it can, again, transform and significantly enhance the tiered responses that you're establishing in your school. Like I said, any school that's engaging in MTSS, when they hear it, they get super excited with this. So that's probably the easiest way. If you search out collaborative response, it's going to bring you to that site as well. And yeah, reach out. I love engaging in conversations with everyone and anyone around this work. Super passionate about it because I've seen the impact it can have for kids. And sorry,
Yeah.
impact for kids and staff at the
Right.
same time.
Right.
We're supporting everyone through this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely search out that book. But just a heads up, as a reminder, you can get the book for free if you get a Live Plus replay ticket. So that's one way to, it's a win-win-win. You get the live access, the replay access plus the book. I mean, how can you resist? Thanks so much, Curtis, for coming on and having this conversation with me. And I look forward to your keynote.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Jess. Thanks for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. Well, my friend, did you enjoy it? I'm really hoping the answer is yes. And like every other podcast out there, I'm going to ask you for some big favors. Can you please make sure that you're subscribed? You don't want to miss the next episode, I promise. And then if you could leave a review, that'd be awesome too. If you're on YouTube, by the way, there's this great thing that you can do where you just go to the box underneath the video and type in your thoughts, ideas, wishes, hopes, dreams, and hit comment. And it shows up under the video. It is public, just a warning. But I'd really love for you to do that. Share with me. What did you think about the episode? Or what are your dreams in life? It's okay. You can really leave any kind of comment. And I'll do my best to respond. Above all else, I appreciate you listening, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.